history has it I was born December the 29th, 1918, on a cold Sunday morning, about 8 o'clock. And that's the first recollection I had of being here. But anyway, that's when I was born, in little town of Old Appleton, which is still in existence. And it's lived there for probably 9 or 10 years of my life, and then I believe then, well, everything happened, started at Old Appleton. Went to school there 1 year in a little public school, and then I went back to school at Apple Creek, which was a German-speaking school at that time. And of course, that was the language of the time. And of course, everything was natural. I had a little smattering of English when I went to the little school in Appleton, but then after I went back to the parochial school at Apple Creek, then of course I lost all of that English, and so that's for the first 3 years of my school life, it was strictly in German. No, I was born in Old Appleton in a house that's still in existence there today. It's on the Perry County side. It's a brick house, and Alma Unterreiner, who is still, is about my age, and she's still living there. And we lived there for 2 years, and then after about 2 years, well, they moved on to the Cape County side into a house next to the old general store there, right behind the brewery. And I sometimes think it because when I was 2 years old, Mary Boone, who was a black lady that worked for Mom. By the way, she was a slave in her youth. And she saw me, and I was in the middle of the bridge looking down into the water. And the bridge, of course, is still there. And I guess they got scared that I might fall in, so they moved on to the Cape County side so I wouldn't have to cross the bridge anymore. I was the third born. My first two, Hubert was born, I believe, in 1915, and he died at the age of 5 days. And then my sister Hildegard was second born, and she died in 1919, and I'm not for sure of the date, but it was in the winter time, and that was during the big flu epidemic they had at that time. But I, as far as ever having known her, no, because I was just born then, and I was probably maybe 6 months old when she passed away from the cub at that time. And then I was the third born, but I survived the flu and the epidemic that was going on at that time. Yes, the worst epidemic in history, and it's interesting that in those days with the epidemic like it was, and later on, in conversation with some of the old doctors at that time, that the old home remedies are the one that saved a lot of people, rather than the store-bought medicine, so to speak. And in those days, the accent was on, if you had a bad cold, you had a mustard plaster put on your chest, and that bitched the hell out of you. But anyway, and I think we got well in spite of it, because the odor was terrible. And but they would put it on and use flannel rags, and they itched to beat the band. But it was a medication that was sort of homemade at the time, and they used like turpentine and some other chemicals that were normally around, well, coal oil instead of kerosene. Those days we didn't have kerosene. We had coal oil, and that was used for a lot of things, but Vaseline and Vapor Vicks was the other cold remedies that they used at that time. Camphor, oh yeah, camphor, my God, that was the going thing. You could smell you 2 blocks away. Oh yeah, for burns and colds and whooping cough and hiccups, I guess. Well, there was 8 of us, 8 or 9, forget how many it was. It's myself and Clay. There were 11 of us total. 11. There were 11 children, and but my sister Margaret, she died at the age of 41. But we'd lost. She was the only one, and she died of nephritis, which was a kidney disease, and but anyway, she was the only one that passed away prior to the recent happenings. Our families came from Rechten, Germany, which is in the Alsace-Lorraine, or the French area of Germany. And my sisters, Laverne and Teresa, went over to Germany and visited the parish that they were from. But they migrated from Rechten, Germany, and that was my great-grandparents. And they settled then at Longtown. And of course, in those days, back in that time, there was a great movement of German people. An interesting thing about it is that the Lutheran side of the migration all settled over in Altenburg, Wittenberg, and Frohna, and areas like that. And those towns that are there now were named after the towns that they came from in Germany. Now, our group, the German Catholics, and well, I used to tell the story about the reason the churches faced east and west was because the Lutherans were watching us and the Catholics were watching them, but we were on the west side of the road and the Lutherans on the east side, but the Highway 25 sort of separated the religion of the Lutherans and the Catholics. So the Catholics all lived on the west side of that highway, and the Lutherans all on the east side. And in those days, they kind of got along, but not too well. It used to be in German. In those days, and I remember them as a child, but you were either verdammte Lutherische or verdammte Katholische. Translated is you're either damn Catholic or damn Lutheran. And that was really the way it was in that section of the county. And but that was, they did not get along in those days. They tolerated each other, but then, in our generation, changed all of that. And because I don't know whether we were dumb or what, but we didn't carry on the tradition. And even today, you'll find that it's not, I guess you could call it segregated religion, where the Lutherans still live predominantly on the east side, and the other Catholics and et cetera live on the west side, up in that area, which would be the Perry County area. My grandparents were born my grandfather on my mother's father was born in Longtown, and my father was born at Apple Creek. And of course, that's not very far from Longtown, but anyway, they all belonged to the Catholic faith, and which was the St. Joseph Parish at Apple Creek was where they all belonged to that parish. Oh yes, they were farmers. My grandfather, Buckeye, farmed the farms around Longtown, and my grandfather, Meyer, farmed at Apple Creek. And both of them, the farms that they had probably were around 300 acres. And in those days, we farmed the modern way for the time, which was walking behind a plow and a horse. And so it wasn't until, I guess, when I was about 18 that we got the first semblance of a tractor. But prior to that time, we used horses and mules to do all the farming. Every summer I would go down to my grandfather's at Longtown because they had a son named Philip who was a year older than I. I'd go down when school was out, I'd go down to the farm, and that's where I stayed until time to go back to school. And then I'd go back home. Here's my uncle, yeah, only a year older than I, yeah. Yeah, in fact, when I was little, we used to, before we were old enough to walk behind a plow or even milk, why, we played with the cats. We built stables and little wagons and stuff like that for the cats to play and pull around. But we were typical children at the time. My father's side, they had a farm also at Apple Creek. And some of the summers I would go down there and stay with them. And I did that when I was a little older because I was able to do plowing, and I would do the cultivating. He rigged a cultivator for me so I could do riding, because walking, I was walking like this to hold the handles, but anyway, we made stirrups on the cultivator so I could ride it and plow it that way. But they gave me a spooky mule and a blind mare. I guess they were afraid one of them would run, but the other one wouldn't run, but it happened a couple of times. But anyway, that was, and I enjoyed every bit of that. And I love to, on the farm, I would go and cut the hay. I was about 10 years old, I guess, 11 maybe. And I had a team, and I would cut all the hay, and then I would hook it up to a dump rake, and then I'd go dump rake it and roll it real good so it would dry. And then a few days later, we'd come along and pick it up and haul it to the barn and put it in the loft. Oh yeah, it was hard work. I'd get up in the morning about 4 o'clock or daylight and go down and milk the cows early in the morning and feed the horses and get them ready. Then about 5:30 then, women folks would have a big breakfast cooked, and we'd eat a big breakfast and drink a couple of glasses of wine and then go out and field and work till about 9 o'clock. And then we would stop, rest the team, and then they would somebody would bring a basket of fresh homemade bread and butter and coffee, and we'd sit under a tree while we rested the team and snack, and then do that, and then we'd go back to plow until about noon. Then at about 11:30, we'd come back in and put the team in the barn, feed them, and then go in and eat a big noon meal, and then we'd lay down somewhere in a shade or somewhere and go to sleep for about an hour. And so then we'd get up and go back and get the team and go back and work till stars came out. And that was a daily routine. And but it was a way of life, and I enjoyed every bit of it. It was a lot of fun. Every once in a while it got a little exciting because some of the times you'd be plowing through a bumblebee nest or something like that. You'd stir them up and you'd get a little action around there. They'd come and sting you or sting the mules, and then you'd raise the plow so they couldn't run. Slow things down. Christmas was it was a time of the year that how do I want to say this? It was a good time. I mean, what we enjoyed about Christmas was that Dad and I would, and Cleet or whoever, we would go out in, first part of December or the middle part. We'd go along the bluff or somewhere looking for a Christmas tree. And we would, and moss, we would gather moss. And then we would bring that home and we would set up the tree. And then Mom and all of us, we'd pitch in and we would build a mountain scene. And we would have the nativity scene. We would, instead of a stable, we had caves we built. And we had the little statues of the sheep and the cow and the donkey and the shepherds and what have you. And so it was set up, and it was just a great time. We loved to do that. We had no electricity at the time, and so everything was candle power. Even the lights on a tree were clip-on candles. And but the interesting thing, we would string popcorn to put it on the tree instead of tinsel. We didn't have tinsel. We didn't know what it was. But we had snow, what do you call it, icicles. We had a lot of that. And then we wouldn't be permitted to go into that room until Christmas Eve. And only then, after Mom or Dad had gone in and lit all the candles, and then we were permitted to go in to see this beautiful tree and the crib. And now in those days, a Christmas gift consisted of maybe a handkerchief, and if we had an apple and an orange, that was great. That was wonderful. And Christmas gifts were, they really knew about it. But like I said, we got a handkerchief for Christmas. But that was not Christmas. That was not what Christmas was about. Christmas to me was, pardon? Yeah, the experience of what Christmas was. We would look forward to getting up at 4 o'clock Christmas morning. And we would all get ready and get in the car, colder than Billy Hell, and drive down to Apple Creek to go to Mass at 5 o'clock in the morning. That was a thrill. And even to this day, I can visualize and how happy we all were, you know. And that was Christmas. I remember one time we got a wagon for Christmas for all of us. But gifts were not the thing, except nuts and popcorn balls and stuff like that. But it was a season that was really what it should be, in my opinion, even today. But we had, it was just a pure joy to be in the dark and drive down to Apple Creek. And of course, headlights in those days weren't very bright, you know. And my father was a bookkeeper, an accountant. Today they would call him a CPA. When he was in school, and in those days they only went to school 4 years, and the priest at the Apple Creek saw that my father had a penchant for numbers, and so he taught him accounting, bookkeeping. And so my father then learned how to keep books, and then that was his life's work from then on. He was a bookkeeper and general manager of the old Appleton Brewery during before and during and after the Prohibition. And in those days, you didn't have typewriters or adding machines. You had, well, they did have an adding machine. It was about that long and about that wide, and it had 3 banks of keys and 1 big handle. But he posted all his numbers with pen and ink, and he had the most beautiful handwriting you could ever imagine. His books were absolutely, they were classic, and postings and what have you. And but that's he was the manager of the brewery, and I have pictures of him. You know, he was the only guy in the picture that had a necktie on, so I knew his dad because he was the bookkeeper. And and he managed that brewery from, I guess, 1915 through 1946, and during some hard times and difficult times. And so we lived at Old Appleton then, but that's another story about the history of the time, because the town also had a whiskey still, and it was illegal at that time because it was a bonded still, which was government approved, and most of that whiskey that they made was bonded whiskey, which was used for medicinal purposes. Not all of it, believe me, but some of it was. But anyway, that was that. In other words, everything, the economy of the town was beer and whiskey, and but that was a livelihood, and we had this big brewery and ice company, and so that was the lifeblood of the community. When we lived at Old Appleton until 1929, when we moved to Perryville, but that was 11 years old when I left there. But I worked in the brewery when I was 10, I think, 10 or 11 years old. I did some work there. I worked in the bottling works. But other than that, but then later on, after we moved to Perryville and I got a little older, then I would go work at the brewery every summer, and during Prohibition, and it was illegal to make beer, but we did it, and we would get raided, every 6 months by the revenue people that come out of St. Louis, and they'd come down and they would empty all our beer in the creek and get drunk and sleep it off on a sandy beach by the creek there. And it's funny, during sometime in the summertime or in the spring of the year, when one time they raided us and dumped all that beer in the creek, the people that lived along the bluff put a wire fence across it, and all of this beer went in the creek, and them fish got drunk. And they floated on down, and so they caught them in this wire fence, and then they brought them into town, and we had a big fish fry. And while we were eating them fish and having a good time, and the revenue people were sleeping it off on the creek bank, we were setting another batch, run it off, and another 6 months later they'd come back and do it again. But my father, it's very difficult to describe how I feel about him, because I have the utmost respect for my father and for the things that he went through during the Depression days. We touched a little bit upon this, what happened to us in those days, but he was a sole wage earner in the home. And he worked day and night, literally, to keep food and things in the house. He was, as I stated, he was a bookkeeper. Now they call them CPAs. And he was very dedicated to the family. He was, if we needed medical help, bingo, he was right there. He was a tough guy. We had to toe the line pretty good, but he was very fair about all that. And he made sure that we got to church on Sundays. He made sure that we got the medical attention we needed, and he made sure that we got plenty to eat. Some way or another, we always got something to eat. Dad worked all the time. He worked in the brewery, and he'd come home, and then he would go to another place and do bookkeeping at night. And then the brewery shut down. And then he had no job. Then we moved to Perryville. And then he got a job in a shoe factory. And so he went to work in a shoe factory. And the first week, he came home, and I never saw a more happy man in my life. He had a $57 check as his money for the week. And, oh man, we thought heavens opened up. This was easy times are here. Well, the next week, the check was $13. They had made a mistake. And you talk about somebody's ego went down the tube. I saw him, tears running down his cheek, because wasn't worried about himself, but what was he going to do to take care of his family? And so they toughed that out, but he had these other little jobs. He did the bookkeeping for the Knights of Columbus, and then he did some bookkeeping work for a bus line, PROST, Pro Bus Line, and the shoe factory. So, but anyway, then things got better. The brewery opened up again, and then we moved from South Main Street to another house out on West St. Joseph Street, and so things were getting along pretty good. Then I would go in the summertime, I would work in the brewery. I'd go to Appleton with Dad every morning and work 12 hours a day, 7 days a week for 11 cents an hour. And, what that figures out is a little over $11 a week. It was a salary. I had money left over because I was too doggone tired to do anything. And I went to a movie one time, a quarter, and went to sleep. Never saw the movie, and that was my summer. Then the next year, I went to work in Perryville at the Kroger store, and I made the ungodly sum of 20 cents an hour. But I did that part-time then, so I'd carry handbills and stuff like that. But that was just, then Mom was there morning, noon, and night. She was dedicated to our home and to us. She could do anything. And she could cook anything, she could bake anything, and if she called you by your first name, you knew that you had to do something. Like if she said, Thomas, well, I know I was in trouble, or something like that, something wasn't right. But she made clothes, she did the housewife work, she she was the boss. She ran the show. And Dad was, if she couldn't handle it, he handled it when he got home. So, but we didn't let that happen too often. But everybody loved her, and as well, she passed away. She was 88 years old. She lived with us for quite some time, and we would talk about those days. My father passed away at the age of 72. He got Parkinson, and he was literally an invalid for several years. And God love her, she took care of him all that time. Of course, Rupert and I, we would drive to Perryville, and we'd bring him down here and doctor and all that. We in the 60s, and our family was very close, and yet they beat the hell out of you if you needed it. We had our fights, and but come nighttime, everything was over with. Our childhood was how do I want to say this? Typical for the time. We had no television, we had no radio, we had nothing. We had a street light, geez, big street light, one bulb. And I'll never forget, we lived down at Apple Creek, and this winter time, the people across the road had electricity, but it was they made their own electricity. They had a system of batteries with acid in them, about 20 jugs and glass jugs that had whatever the acid is with copper strips. They had a gas pump, and they had a store. And above this gas pump, there was a light pole, and there was a light on that, a light bulb, and that would burn at night. And which was okay, except what we thought was the greatest thing that we ever saw was one night it snowed. And here was this snow coming down, and we watched it. We were absolutely enthralled watching that snow fall at night with that light out there. And so if you ever see snowfall, big flakes, and a single light in the total darkness, it was, well, I remember that yet to this day. And thinking about that, if you ever have an opportunity, Christmas up there where the grotto is at Apple Creek, you and Mid-Affy and I, yeah. Well, that's where I used to play, in the grottos, in the water. But now they got a big deal. But our recreation was tag, hide and go seek, and baseball. And I guess that's about it. But I mean, and every once in a while we'd get in a fight. Didn't last long, but and we were always running. I mean, we're chasing somebody and playing tag and what have you in a country school. We walked 3.5 miles to school each way. And I'm not saying that because I want to say how tough we had. We didn't have a great time. But we would, and I was first grade, second grade, and third grade, walk from Old Appleton to Apple Creek. And rain or shine. And I remember one time we got down to within a mile of school, and there's a little creek there, and it rained and it was flooding. And so the lady across the creek there saw we were all standing out, so she called my dad. And so she let us know that Hugo was on his way. And so all we knew, we were going to go back home. Like heck, he brought us all our boots and got us across the creek and made us go to school. We all wanted to go home, but it didn't happen that way. And that was Bill Schott's grandmother. That Bill Schott, the accountant here. And another time, in the wintertime, we would walk home in school. People in those days would be in the woods chopping down trees and making firewood. Well, they would cut grapevine. You know, there's a lot of grapevine growing trees wild, so they'd cut off pieces about 6-8 inches long. We'd grab them and light them up. We'd smoke grapevine. You ever smoke grapevine? If you didn't, you ought to. And so that was another thing we used to do. Then we used to, we had these hoops that we would roll. We would take a wagon wheel and cut all the spokes out of it, then make a hoop out of it, and we see who could roll it the farthest, the longest, going down to school. But in my, when I was 16 years old, no, I was 14, I worked in the brewery a lot. Every summer I worked in the brewery. And everything in those days was done manually, literally. And we had a big machine in the back, if you can imagine, it had racks. And you'd put the dirty bottles in that rack, and it automatically, or on a chain-driven deal, it would take it down through a solution of whatever it is, acids of some type, sterilize it, and then dump it into a big tank. And then we would grab the bottles and wash the outside, and then we had another gadget on the tub that had a spinning brush on it, so we'd put the bottle on the brush and clean it on the inside, then put it on the sprinkler head over here, 24 sprinkler tubes that tall, and when you got them on, you push another lever and sprinkle the inside, and then put them in cases upside down, the 300 bottles to a case, and then we'd set those to the side. Well, we'd stack those 9 high, and can you imagine a 15-year-old boy standing there with 300 bottles with another guy on the other end, setting them up that high? Well, we did. In those days, I mean, of course, I was in a heck of a good shape. When I got back to school for football, I was in pretty good shape. But we would go to work in the morning. I would drive to work in the morning, and Dad would drive home in the evening. And we'd get there at 6 o'clock. Well, we'd go in the tap room and drink a couple of beers, and so we'd go and work. And then 9 o'clock, we'd take a 15-minute break and go drink a couple of more beers and eat a sandwich. And then we'd go back and do work some more, and then at noon, we took 30 minutes for lunch. And we ate a bologna sandwich and crackers and drank some more beer. And about 3 o'clock, things were getting pretty happy. And Dad would drive home every night, so I'd sleep on the way home and get up next morning and do the same thing over. But and that's really, truthfully, that's what it was, and every day. But 7 days a week. And heck, it was a job, and there was nothing else to do, and like I said, I had money, but I had no time to spend it or anything till I got into school. Also when I was in the one summer, and a later summer, I think I was probably in the junior year, I worked at the brewery, but I didn't do any manual labor. I did a lot of design work. I designed labels and painted sceneries and oil painting and stuff like that. I can't find it. I got a label that I made that was popular, and they used that in the brewery. I designed the signs that they took on around. And we had a clown that had a mule, and he was our advertising. He had a trailer. And the mule and the drunk were drunk every day. Mule and the guy who owned it were drunk literally every day, but they put on a good show. This mule, he would go to various towns and put on a show. And he'd have his mule, and he'd set out 6 bottles of beer, different brands. And he'd lead the mule up there. The mule would shake his head. To another one, shake his head. Another one, shake his head. Directly go to another one. That's what he wanted. But that was the beer we made. So the clown, I don't know what his signals were, but anyway, it was advertising stunt that we had. And I did a lot of advertising for that. I used to do a lot of advertising work, designing. That was a fellow by the name of Harry Ticketcheck from Cape used to come up there, and then he brought a lot of the artwork that I did down here. And a lot of the labels that I designed were then lithographed down at the Missouri. And during World War II, Old Appleton Apex beer was premium beer on the West Coast, made in the Midwest. And but jumping around and following some trends of thoughts here, but I remember one time, VE Day, I believe it was, I was in Fort Worth. We wanted to celebrate, and the breweries at Dallas said they didn't have enough beer to furnish us with it for over to Fort Worth Army Airfield. So I called Dad. I said, if I needed 2 truckloads of beer, can you have them in Memphis by so and so time? If I let you know in the next 30 minutes, he said, yeah, we can do that. Well, it turned out it didn't, but anyway, we were already putting the floorboards in a B-24 bombers, so we were going to fly into Memphis and pick it up and cool it at 15,000 feet altitude or 20,000. Go have cold beer when we landed at Fort Worth. But we used to do that anyway, but when we were flying. But some other things that we did for recreation, because Philip and Arnold, a cousin, we would, for Sunday recreation, we'd get some dynamite and we'd shoot sinkholes. And that was the Sunday recreation. Now, if I'd get caught with dynamite, they'd put me in jail. But that was just the way it was. We would shoot sinkholes or stumps, or jug bees, or just crawl caves. Biggest kick I got when I was reading the stories here not long ago about the spelunkers, and hell, we didn't even know what that was. And but Sunday afternoon, I remember one of the doctors here in Cape that crawled a cave, and he was talking about it, and I quizzed him on it, and it turned out, I said, hell, Doc, I crawled that cave when I was 14 years old in Perryville. And they got all these ropes and everything. All we had was a carbide light and matches. And no, we didn't have any ropes. We never thought about that at all. But in those days, we had to make our own recreation. It was just, and we had a hell of a good time, because after Sunday Mass, for example, we'd get together with a lot of our friends, and we would pitch horseshoes or dollars, or just play tag, or just do anything. And so go fishing, and sometimes we'd go fishing with dynamite too, but then that's not supposed to have been happening. They float real good in those days, but it was not unusual. And it was not unusual in those days, and I never was involved in the one that we went fishing one time. We didn't get a darn thing. We found out a week later that a group of them got together and just seined our pond one night. They took all of our fish out. And so, but anyway, those were things that were going on at the time. And we had to make our own recreation in those days. And of course, typically hide and seek and tag was, the things that you played around the house. But a
lot of the things you had to make yourself.
Oh yeah, we made everything we had. The thing about that time was, during the Depression days, we were all poor and didn't know it. And I saw pictures of a catcher's mitt, and I saw pictures of a catcher's mask, and I saw a picture of a glove. We couldn't afford any of that. Now, we had a baseball. We knocked the cover off of it, so we put black tape around it. But I made the catcher's mitt out of canvas, and I made face mask for a catcher's mask out of, I got some wire off of a telephone cable, and I bent it and made a frame, and then put wrappings around it out of canvas and straps, and then I made a fielder's glove out of, I forget what that was, but some leather. I always try to get a pocket in there with leather. And we'd get somebody to turn a bat for us on a lathe. And, and that was just a way of life, and that's just the way it was. And we had a hell of a good time. We'd get on, a friend of mine or one of our neighbors had a truck. They lived on a farm. And so we'd get together on Sunday afternoons, and we would, in Perryville, he'd drive around town and pick up kids. He'd come along, everybody jumped on the truck. And we'd go to the little towns like Leonton, Lithium, and Beckbride, and Bottomland. And we'd drive in and go on the field, get some rocks and sticks and stuff and boards, and made bases, and we'd play ball. And here they'd come out of the woodwork. Everybody wanted to play ball. And but the interesting thing about it is, baseball today is the same as it was then. I mean, the rules and the bases and runs and so on and so forth, strikes and what have you. And the umpire would be probably some old gentleman that lived in that town, and he'd stand behind the catcher. Most of the time he was walking with a cane. He'd be call the balls and strikes. And but that was just it was fun. It was just we'd make our fun, and we got in later on, got in high school, and got a job and found a little money to buy a mitt, stuff like that. But our recreation, we made all of that. We would go swimming. And I remember I was raising a bunch of rabbits during the Depression days. I had 99 rabbits at one time. And but in the summertime, I always had a pair of bib overalls, and barefooted, of course, and I had a pocket knife, and I'd walk through the field and catch grasshoppers, and put them in my pocket, and I had a fish line, hook and sinker, and a pocket knife, and I'd get down the creek. I'd cut a pole and go fishing. And my stringer then was a willow about 3 feet long with a hook on it, and that's what string my fish on and come home. Tom Sawyer type. I didn't even know Tom Sawyer existed, but that was just the way it was. We had a lot of fish. But like I say, I raised a lot of rabbits, and that's what we survived on during the Depression. I remember one time during the Depression days and it did bother us, but for 2 weeks, we lived on a 100-pound sack of flour and a cistern full of water and salt and pepper and hog jaw, which was the cutting jaw of a hog's head. And that was what we had. But Mom could make anything. A pancake today is a pancake, tomorrow it's strudel, but it was differently. And the next day it would be something else, but it was the same stuff. And she would make, we'd have a lot of syrup in those days, and like molasses and maple syrup and stuff like that. But then that was just the way it was. We weren't the only ones. That was just the way it was. But like I said, I raised those rabbits, and I would go through the fields and dig the grass and cut the grass and bring it in, feed my rabbits, and I got down to one rabbit one time. It was a little black one, and every place I would go, that little rabbit was behind me. And so Mom said to me one day, she says, "Thomas," and the rabbit was behind me, and I knew what that meant. So we had rabbit. They had rabbit that day. For that day forward, I don't eat rabbit. That was my pet, but we had to live. And but and the other thing we would do in the fall of the year, I would go through the woods and pick persimmons and can them and put them in the cellar. And and the other thing that we would do is I would dig a hole in the garden, maybe 5 feet in diameter and maybe 12 inches deep, and I'd put straw in it. And then we put our turnips and potatoes and carrots and any root vegetables we had, and we'd put them in there. And I'd put this dirt over the, put some black paper, tar paper like, over the top of it. And then I'd fill the dirt over the top of it about that high, and that's where we'd heal our stuff in the wintertime. And so, coldest weather, you could go out and open up a little spot and reach in and get your whatever you wanted, turnips or potatoes or sweet potatoes or whatever, apples. And so, and that was what, how we used to take care of our root vegetables.
Pretty much had to live off the land.
Yeah, we did. We lived off the land. We, the black-eyed peas, well, we call that stock peas, but then we would go down in the wintertime and go in the field, and of course, after the heavy frost and all, the pods would be crackling, so we would we'd gather them all in huge bags, and we'd take them home, and then we'd tie the bags up real tight, put them down on the bottom of the steps in the cellar, and then we had fun jumping up and down on. We'd walk up the steps and jump on the bag, walk up the steps and jump on the bag. Well, what happened was we busted all the hulls, then all these beans would go to the bottom, and that's how we hulled our beans. We had fun doing it. And well, we just innovative. That's the way it was. And if you didn't have it, you made it. We many a time instead of syrup, we'd make sugar water, to put on whatever we had. And but when I was a kid in Old Appleton, I would always go to the butcherings, and I would come home with the pigtail and the backbone with loin on it, and so they would give it to me. I'd go to the bench, I'd stand there and watch them. They'd give it to me. And butchering was a way of life with us what I liked about it was everybody was there, and I got to wear my wooden shoes. We wore wooden shoes and around so you could, that's just the way it was. Unless you had rubber boots, but the wooden shoes were the thing to wear. And we wore those because walking through all the mess and everything around there. But, and we'd get up early in the morning to do that, butchering we would. And the neighbors would come and help, and we'd go to the neighbors to help them, and so on and so forth. And that was the same way it was when we were farming. When it came time to bring in your crops, like wheat, for example, we had what we call a ring. And so these are the neighbors around there. And so we'd start one place. We'd help get that done, and we'd go along with the next one all the way around, follow the machine around, and so that was the way it was done in wheat threshing and gathering corn and what have you.
So everybody helped everybody.
Oh yeah, and then every once in a while we'd save enough to run off a batch. We'd have still here or somewhere. We'd cook a batch of moonshine and winter keep warm.
Well, you said your uncle got mad at you one time. Why did he get mad at you?
Yeah, my uncle got mad at me one time. I found his still. And I said, "What the hell are you getting mad at me for?" I said, I knew it was where it was. And I guess he had a bad day, but that was just the way it was. And we made a lot of wine, and every summer we had a lot of grape. But I remember one day we made a bunch of wine and didn't think nothing of it, and we had the presses and everything. And Grandpa got us out of bed about daylight, and he said, "We got a bunch of dead hogs." And so we went out, got up, and we went on down. This is daylight. And sure enough, there was a bunch of dead hogs laying there, about 15 of them. Until my uncle Isidore, who was kind of hot-headed, he walked up to one and kicked it right in the stomach, and it said, "Oink." And he said, "Oh, damn, they're drunk." What happened was the squeezings, the hulls from the grapes, we let them set for a while. We didn't think nothing of it, and then we took them down and put them in the hog lot. Well, heck, they had fermented. And the roosters got drunk and the hogs got drunk. They're the funniest thing in the world is a drunk rooster.
You don't see that every day, do you?
Oh, yeah. But everybody, that's the way it was. We had a big barrel of wine in our cellar at Apple Creek there, Grandpa, and I remember one time come in and it was hot and that was a cool place. So I laid down on the floor there, but then I saw the hose hanging up on a nail. And so I got the hose and stuck it in the barrel and laid it on the floor and sipped the wine out of the barrel. I didn't get up. I slept there the whole next night, but I got up the next day. I got drunk on wine, and when I started getting up, I fell right back down. They laughed about it, but the way it was. But I had I think I had an exciting life. When we were going to move to Perryville in 1929, and in August, we moved in a house on South Main Street, and right next door, maybe from here to the next house down, was the difference between our house and the neighbor's house. And they had a sidewalk along there. And we had a baby buggy, and I was pushing Rupert, who was a baby at that time, up and down that sidewalk, and just laughing and having a big ball, and the neighbors having a ball, laughing and going on. Didn't realize till later why. See, we were German, and they were English, and I was talking nothing but German, and going on in German, and they got the biggest kick out of that, and I thought they were having fun because we were having fun. It was anyway. Then we started the school, and on Sunday, Dad took Cleta and I to Mass at St. Boniface and showed us how we were going to walk to school. So come Monday morning, we took off for school. Walked this way, to the left, to the right, then around, and so all of a sudden we noticed we'd been around the block again. So a lady come out of the house and she asked a question, and she realized we didn't understand what she was saying, so she asked us in German. And so she'd got us to school. Well, the priest then took my brother and I in tow and taught us English so we can go to school. We knew a little bit of English, like bad words, but to get in the school without being tutored, we didn't, but it took a little while, not too long, but at that age you catch on pretty quick.
You were fortunate this priest kind of took you under his wing.
Yeah, Father Jim Huber. Yeah, he was, but I was at St. Boniface, and it was 1939. Oh, yeah, when I was in the first grade, I went to two first grades, Appleton and then at Apple Creek. But in Appleton, when I went to school there, Dad got me a lunchbox. And Mom fixed me a nice lunch and they took me to school. Well, that was to be my lunch. Well, recess came, so I ate everything I had and walked down the house. And I walked in the house, Mom said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I'm hungry." Anyway, but going to Apple Creek, though, then when I started down there, we had a picnic, parish picnic, and so had a big ball and then went to school down there. The next day I went to school. Dad, the ice cream stand was still there, so Dad got me some ice cream and I ate that. And yeah, I thought, this is great, ice cream and go to school. Well, the next day there was none. I was kind of disappointed because I thought you'd have ice cream to go to school every day. It didn't work out that way. But I went to school there for 3 years and everything in German. Most everything was in German. And so then that's when, then in whatever it was, in 1929, yeah, we moved to Perryville. And so I had to learn English. And, but in those days, picnics were a great deal. And at my age, I could get a beer and drink beer at the picnic. I was about, whatever it was, 8 or 9 years old. But now you can't do that. But that was just the way it was in those days, because we were all poor and didn't know it. And but anyway, when we lived at Apple Creek, Mom and I would have to go down every morning and milk the cows. This was early in the morning, wintertime or summertime. But that was just, again, that's the way it was. But we moved to Perryville then, as I stated earlier. But and through grade school then, but then in the high school. And I went to St. Vincent High School, and I'm trying to think. I don't know how many students we had, but not many. But I was a freshman, and I weighed 119 pounds. And we had football. And we had enough equipment to equip the team, but not enough equipment to suit the 9 more. In other words, for scrimmage or what have you. And so, but we would the team on the field would have helmets, and if we went as substituted, he'd give me his helmet, we'd go on in. But it was a crazy situation. Well, truthfully, if you look at old Newt Rockney pictures and you see a helmet that's squeezed together, where they sat on them, that's what we had. Until about the middle of the sophomore year, then they had a coach that came in from Chicago, and he had bought some regular helmets for them. But we didn't have enough shoulder pads for scrimmage even, but we lost every game the first year. And the second year I think we won 1 game. And the third year we did pretty good, and the fourth year we did real great. But in those days we would go to Chaminade in St. Louis or to Alton and play football, or St. Genevieve. And our transportation was a 2-ton truck, flatbed truck, with side rails on and canvas. And that's where we grab everything, throw it on, and get on there. Boys and girls got on, and that's how no buses or anything like that. We didn't even know anything about buses. And But again, no, that's just the way it was. We played Chaminade. No, we played a team out of Belleville, Illinois one time, and they had a black playing on their team. And boy, he just razzle-dazzled us to beat hell. And so Tommy Phillips was on the line, and he said, he just mentioned the heck out of me. I said, just a minute. I said, and I got a hold of two of the other guys. I said, here's what we're going to do. We've got in a huddle. And so we got him down, and I said, I step on his shins. And we walked on his shins, and they took him out of the game, and we won the game. But the next time he came back, he had shin guards on. And they beat us real good because he could run, boy. And but whatever we tried the second time didn't work. But but in those days, we would, in St. Genevieve, for example, they didn't have any football fields, and we played out in the city park, and we had to run across a gravel road, you know, to the goal where the goalposts were, and it was just makeshift in a lot of those places. Now in Festus and Crystal City, they had a football field, and then of course in Perryville we had a regular football field. But East Prairie had a big field with sandburrs and everything else, and we played in that. And there was another place, I forget where it was. It was loamy ground, but now of course everybody's got a good field, and they got quite an interest in the game. But we didn't have the intramural or whatever you call it programs. We never played baseball against St. Genevieve or any other teams, only interscholastic at home. But football, yeah, we traveled Chaminade and St. Louis, and Festus and Crystal City, and East Prairie, and Belleville, Illinois, and I was fullback. Well, the first 2 years, first year I was playing center, and then the first 2 years I played the center. Then in my junior and senior year I was fullback. I got a little bigger, but but it was a big event, you know, for us to play football, and but baseball was in. We never did play anybody else other than in our own school. How many members? Oh, well, when I was a freshman, I'm trying to think. They were not very. Well, I guess we were typical because, you know, it was like getting out of the 8th grade, and the subject matter in those days was a little bit more than what you would have had in the 8th grade. But now, of course, academically, you have so many other things. But the accent emphasis was on education. And now in grade school, I was an artist, and I did a lot of. I would do a lot of colored chalk work on blackboards and stuff like that. I would draw like Thanksgiving scenes and Christmas scenes and Easter scenes, and I must have been pretty good at it because the nuns got in an argument about whose boards I was going to work on. But then in high school, then we had, and I've got some artwork around here that I've got, but I could paint pictures and oils and stuff like that, sceneries, And then, but I did a whole biology program one time in pen and ink where I drew all the designs and then like your brain and your eye and your jaws and stuff like that. And then also I did a lot of design work that I've drawn pictures of in 1936 and 37. And as a house builder in 1953, I used some of my plans to build set disposal systems that I had designed, not knowing what the heck I was doing. But anyway, it was my idea. And I did a lot of artwork in high school, and we had the usual high school routine, parties and what have you. Now, remember, we weren't as mobile as you guys were in those days. Everywhere we went, well, the guys, there was only 3 cars to students in our school. 3 cars, and we had, maybe 100 students. Now you got 100 cars and 100 students, but we didn't have that in those days. We weren't that mobile. But our emphasis was a lot on baseball and football and track and other activities around school. And we always, and every once in a while, I remember in class we would go on a picnic. Well, we would, as a group, we would go to Lake Killarney, or we'd go out to Saline Creek, which was an event, and we'd go swimming and what have you. And I'll never forget one time, I called a number of Harry Lawless, and I said, told Harry, I said, well, Harry, I got the stuff. And so another voice came on the line and said, Harry ain't going. Well, I didn't know. The only people in town that had 2 phones. Mom was on the phone upstairs. So we went on down to the creek and had our party. But we'd go out to the creek and drink and eat hot dogs or whatever we had. And I remember that I bought a fountain pen. I think I paid $7.50 for a special Palmer Method fountain pen, and I paid it out at a rate of 50 cents a month. And my football shoes, I bought a pair of shoes from the guy downtown that had football shoes. I bought those and paid him, I think it's $7.50 for football cleated shoes. And I paid them out at about 50 cents a week, so I had shoes to run in. But that was just the way it was, and nobody thought anything about it. Just everybody's in the same boat.